Jay. Welcome to Mvskoke Radio, your weekly source for tribal and community news, interesting guests and discussions, plus a local events calendar. SJ, Stongo, Gary Fife, Jaho Jifkados, Mvskoke Radio, Mabo Hedgedawedge. Welcome to our program here today. We are going to do a couple of things here to try and get on track and get you a good show here today. We'll be speaking with the Executive Director of the Indigenous Women's Resource Center, Indian Women's Resource Center, about the missing and murdered women. And in the second portion of our show, the Irish and the Choctaws have a wonderful relationship going, and they are the Irish are helping them out during this time of stress. But first, let me do a couple of things here to get all of our guests lined up, and we'll be right back right after that.
Who am I? Am I Indian? Just 'cause I'm a girl from the res, don't make things up about me. What if I move away? Then who am I? Some kids try meth just to escape, but then I think about my grandma, my little brother, my beadwork, my poetry, and I think, I like who I am, and I know meth is not for me.
Check out ncai.org, a message from the Partnership for a Drug-Free America and the National Congress of American Indians.
Who am I? Am I Native? I don't want people assuming things because I'm Indian. I just want to be me. But how do I live in two worlds? Some guys just check out by doing meth. But that ain't for me. Because I see my family, my friends, my drum making, my future. There are a lot of cool things about being who I am. And meth isn't one of them.
Learn more at ncai.org, a message from the Partnership for a Drug-Free America and the National Congress of American Indians.
All right, let's get on with our program here. Good morning, Ms. Elizabeth Carr. Are you with me there?
I am. Nice to be with you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for making some time. I know everyone's schedules are all upside down and a little crazy there, but we are thinking that maybe a chance to talk with you about a very important subject is something we needed to do. So what we've got is the focus on murdered and missing Indian women and persons, and it's been getting a lot more attention lately in most of the major news outlets and, of course, the local stuff. We personally think that was years in the making, and it's about time. But there has the attention here is going to be useful, and we have just seen a significant day last week regarding this subject.
Yeah, absolutely. So we, obviously from our perspective at the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, we know that missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls is not a new crisis, and it's been happening since contact, to be honest. And so, the grassroots folks and activists in our tribal communities have been trying to raise awareness of this issue for many years, decades really, but in the last couple of years it's really taken hold and gotten the attention of mainstream media as well, so we're really thankful for that. Last week was the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls National Day of Awareness. It's really meant to commemorate victims and survivors and their families of those who have gone through either being abducted or murdered. And so we were really grateful to be able to be a part of that. We hosted a number of events, including a webinar, some media interviews, a Twitter chat, and a Twitter storm. And we've noticed that with social media becoming more prevalent, that it's easier to get our messages out through those avenues. And so we've really been focusing on those, and we've really had an uptick in people being interested in at least learning about the issue, which in turn creates a little bit of more attention from a congressional aspect to create some real change on the policy level that hopefully will result in change on the ground. So we're really thankful for May 5th to be recognized as a National Day of Awareness for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls.
Now, the president has also made a declaration regarding that subject. How did that come around, do you know? And what good, how useful is it?
Sure. Well, this would be the second year in a row that President Trump has declared the National Day of Awareness. Anytime we can get attention at a national level is a positive thing. He has also established the Operation Lady Justice Task Force, which is really at this point only representative of the federal agency's perspective. And so we're hopeful that in the future, if this task force is to continue on, that they really get the feedback of the tribal communities to really improve their focus level and be able to understand the issue from the ground level. Of course, the federal perspective is very different than what's actually happening on the ground. And so while we are grateful for the president for raising awareness on this issue at his level, there's definitely a lot more work from the federal agency perspective that really needs to take into account the viewpoint and perspective of people on the ground so that there's a better understanding of the root causes of the issues and we can begin to take steps forward in addressing some of those root causes.
Why don't we take a second here to learn a little bit about yourself and particularly your organization. Now, that's not a organizational name. I think it is known to a lot of Native Americans and particularly our dominant society. But why don't you explain a little bit about who you all are?
Sure. Well, yeah, my name is Liz Carr, and I'm a citizen of the Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indians. And I currently serve as the Senior Native Affairs Advisor for the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center. And what we are is a Native-led nonprofit organization that's dedicated to ending violence against Native women and children. And so part of our work involves bringing awareness to missing and murdered Native women and girls and advocating to really end the horrific crisis as it stands. We provide national leadership in ending gender-based violence in tribal communities by really focusing in on and lifting up the collective voices of grassroots advocates and offering culturally grounded resources, technical assistance, and training, as well as policy development to strengthen tribal sovereignty, really to enable tribes to address this crisis in the best ways that they know how. And so that's kind of the underlying reason why we're involved in this issue and really have the honor of kind of taking the lead on pushing this issue forward in the halls of Congress, but also in federal agencies, and then from the grassroots on up. And so we're really honored to be able to do this work.
Now, let me ask you, from your vantage point there in the nation's capital and working with the groups across the nation and Native groups across the nation, how would you assess the problem facing us? Are we making any progress? Are we losing ground? Are we just kind of hanging right at a particular plateau? And of course, having someone go missing or murdered is often such a tragic thought. But if you were going to kind of give me a summary of the challenge you're facing, what might that be?
So I think it's hard to quantify where we are in terms of the actual crisis itself, because there is an absolute lack of data on the number of missing and murdered Indigenous women in this country. And so it's hard to quantify where we've come from, where we're going when we don't actually know the number of folks who are actually being impacted by the crisis. And I will say that by raising awareness, we've gotten a lot more attention, both from Congress as well as from federal agencies, and their attention has led to at least some proposed legislation that will help tribal nations address this crisis. Unfortunately, not much has actually happened in terms of getting that legislation across the finish line due to a number of things, but the COVID crisis has really impacted the movement of a lot of those bills as they move forward in Congress. And so we continue to push forward and advocate to get those bills moving, to really bring resources to tribal communities, to improve data collection, to really focus in on the issue from the ground level versus from a federal level. And so that's kind of where we are. I think we're making progress in that regard. But like I said, it's hard to quantify what kind of progress we're making in terms of actually stemming the actual crimes from happening, because we really don't know an accurate number of folks who've been impacted, if that makes sense.
Yes. One more question in that same vein. We've seen the number of resources available to women in this situation increase. And most of those folks, particularly in Creek Nation, have say they are being used more. More people are calling them for help. Now, in making an assessment of the problem, you say, well, the numbers are going up. But is that a situation where there's more ability to report, or rather than a huge increase in the problem?
Well, I think that's a really good question. I think that's something we have to explore as we move forward. I don't think we can, assuredly say that because there's an increase of resources, we're seeing an increase of callers, and it's really been that baseline all along. I do think that, for instance, with the COVID situation, we're actually seeing a decrease in people accessing resources, but that doesn't mean those crimes aren't still happening. So it's really hard to quantify what that looks like in terms of numbers, because we don't have accurate data from the baseline to even begin to understand what an increase of resources means in terms of it increasing just accessibility, or if there's an increase in crimes. And so our gut instinct is that it's increasing accessibility, and that with increased resources, increased jurisdiction through the 2013 VAWA, and further increasing that jurisdiction as we move forward, will actually end up decreasing the amount of crime as we move forward. But it's hard to say because we don't have that data to really suggest a trend in any way.
Okay, let me ask you about what I think might be a trend. We have covered this subject for years now and worked with our own team here at the Mvskoke Creek Nation. And one of the questions I always like to ask is, are attitudes changing? I mean, obviously there are more women coming forward and exerting their strength and commitment, but have the perpetrators, perhaps an abusive husband or boyfriend, or a woman, taking physical activity against a man. Has that attitude changed? Are more people aware, do you think, and are willing to deal with it now?
No, I think that's a really great question as well. I think when we talk about the work that we do, we also talk about prevention and raising awareness that physical violence is just never okay. And so I think it's something we're working toward. Anecdotally, I do think that there has been some improved attitude over time in regards to physical violence against an intimate partner. But again, it's one of those things that the data is just not there to be able to, actually quantify that. And so anecdotally, absolutely, I think prevention is always a really important tool to utilize in making our communities healthier and safer. But again, on the data piece is where we're really missing some of that information.
Right. I could imagine that it's pretty hard to collect. Having a perpetrator sit down and fill out this questionnaire, please.
Right.
Now, we have seen, of course, as our Indian news media continues to flourish, more coverage of events surrounding this particular topic. More women out, say, marching against this kind of abuse and consequences. One of the things that catches my attention is when you see a woman in her full traditional dress with the red handprint across her face. And now that really grabs attention. And perhaps anecdotally again, have you seen, what have you seen then, I guess, as more women step forward and take actions like this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think anytime a poignant image like that can be shared, brings attention to the issue, and the more we get attention to the issue, the more people learn about it and realize that it's an actual pandemic. It's a crisis that's impacting our tribal nations, and so absolutely any awareness. And I think the most powerful imagery is of our Native women taking a stand to say enough is enough, and we're here to really make a stand and make a change and demand change and demand that this crisis be ended. So I think anytime we have that kind of imagery is the most powerful, and I absolutely think that it changes the hearts and minds of folks, whether they're Native or not. And so I think that's a really important piece to hit on, that our Native women have led this effort since it began, and we continue to be that face of the movement. And so thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, it's, of course, a visually stunning image, so naturally my colleagues in the media would eat that up. But I think it for someone who's looked at this issue for a while, it's quite a boosting of your pride and support of these women who step forward like that, and the courage it takes to maybe put yourself on a public display like this. Now, you're sitting there in the nation's capital, and maybe you can give me an idea of the sense of Congress. It's, you can't oppose this thing. It's like opposing mother and apple pie. But what is the sense of Congress? Are they willing to make the deals that have to happen for perhaps a piece of legislation or funding for these programs to go forward? So what have you seen, and what's your perception?
So I think it's a mixed bag, right? And so there are aspects of Congress that are ready to move forward on certain aspects of the bills that have been proposed, and other aspects they are a little bit more apprehensive to take action on, including expanding jurisdiction, unfortunately. And so we have a battle in front of us in terms of advocating to really ensure that our tribal courts and our tribal law enforcement and our sovereignty, to be frank, is honored and respected. And so it's really educating and advocating on behalf of tribes to really restore inherent tribal authority, to be able to kind of take the lead on this effort. In terms of resources, I think there's a little bit more. I think congressmen and congresswomen are a little more apt to be able to provide some of those resources, unfortunately, again, to the federal government versus to the local tribal response. And so while these efforts move forward, and my motto is usually every single step forward is a step forward, and we need to take account of that. But there are a lot of steps that we need to take in order to really get to where we need to be, which is to restore inherent tribal authority and ensure that the programs on the ground have the resources that they need to be able to assist victims, prevent these crimes from happening in the first place by enhancing our prevention services. And so, in terms of things moving forward, I think we'll see baby steps. But we're pushing for more action every single day. We're pushing for folks on the Hill to understand that inherent tribal sovereignty is an authority, is the way that we prevent these crimes from happening in the first place, and really focusing on restoring that tribal authority through expanded jurisdiction, ensuring that tribes have resources, et cetera, and that the federal government is meeting their trust responsibilities. So we're really focusing on those aspects. Do I think we'll see movement in this Congress? I am hopeful that we will see Savannah's Act and the Not Invisible Act be passed. It passed the House. It passed the Senate, and I believe it will pass the House once Congress is kind of fully back in action after responding to the coronavirus. So I do think that we will see some progress in this year, but of course there's much more progress to be made, and we will continue to advocate for that progress until we are to a point where we feel that our tribal nations have their inherent authority restored and adequate resources to be able to address these issues on the ground.
If you had a magic wand and were able to change things to where you think they should be, what goal, I guess, what would you do with that magic wand, and where would we be if you were able to make these changes?
Sure. So I think in terms of getting and restoring our jurisdiction, our tribal law enforcement jurisdiction, that, of course, would be a big, big victory. But enhancing the capacity of our tribal law enforcement and tribal courts to be able to handle all of the additional crimes that would be under their authority, but also really ensuring that victim services are adequately resourced. We know that our victim shelters have hardly enough money to even keep the doors open. So being able to keep the doors open, be well resourced, be able to provide services to victims as they need them, when they need them, those are the important things to be able to really get to the bottom line issues in the MMIW crisis. Being able to serve families when they're in a time of crisis, and being able to demand law enforcement action. And we know that if a tribal law enforcement agency is involved, they're much more likely to engage appropriately than a state law enforcement agency or federal law enforcement agency. So that's why we really push for, restoration of inherent tribal authority. But really, it's such a large issue and requires a really macro level type of approach, boiling down to law enforcement, victim services, tribal courts, and tribal justice systems being adequately resourced to be able to do what we've been doing since time immemorial, which is protecting our citizens and making sure that we have health and safe communities to live in and thrive in. And so that's kind of what we're pushing for. In a magic wand, we would have all of those things right now, but we know that it's going to take some time to be able to get all of those things in line to be able to really put an end to this crisis.
The VAWA Act was hailed as a major step in the in this battle, being able to exert authority over offenders who were not members of the tribe. Has it worked out, do you think? Has it ever received enough support and funding to make these things a useful reality?
Yeah, I think in the tribes that are actually exercising special criminal domestic violence jurisdiction, we have seen an improvement. That being said, there absolutely is not enough funding for all tribes to exercise. It's expensive to exercise jurisdiction. It's expensive to incarcerate criminals. And so in order for that to be a complete success, absolutely we need more funding. But we also need expanded jurisdiction in terms of the crimes that are covered under VAWA, including sexual assault, stalking, crimes against law enforcement officers, crimes against children. There's just a lot of gaps still there. And so that's what we're advocating for in the reauthorization of VAWA. And we're hopeful that we can get some of those major, gaps filled in the next iteration of the Violence Against Women Act.
Where do we go from here? What's the next step? Something that I guess the grassroots folks might see.
I think in terms of grassroots, it's always raising awareness in your own communities. From a prevention standpoint, it's important for folks to see that this is an issue and that we all play a role in protecting members of our community. And then also reaching out to your local lawmakers, your congressional offices there on the ground to say, we've had enough and we want action on this. We have a lot of allies on the Hill, but we also have a lot of folks who don't understand our issues because they just don't seem to either care or understand the issues. And if they're hearing from their constituents that there are issues that the voters care about, there's likely to be more action. So, if you have congressional offices that are close by your reservation communities or your communities at large, please feel free to reach out to them and advocate for the expansion of jurisdiction within VAWA, the reauthorization of the Family Violence Prevention Services Act, the passing Savannah's Act, passing the Not Invisible Act, and really painting a picture that these are necessary actions for your local legislative offices, so that they realize that these are important issues to their voters, and that hopefully that will impress upon them the importance of these issues and lead to positive voting when the bills are actually put forth to vote.
All right, Elizabeth Carr, thank you so much for taking time this morning. Keep up the fight. We appreciate the work you're doing there for our peoples and wish you much success.
Oh, thank you so much for having us.
Okay, it's a pleasure. Thank you, Maro.
Miigwech.
Okay, we are going to take another pause here and see if we can't get our next guest lined up, and then we'll be hopefully getting on with the rest of our show. So stay with us here on Mvskoke Radio on the Brew.
I started doing it when I was 11. I wanted to be just like my big brother. And some of my friends were already doing it. We got hooked fast. I just can't get enough. I'm Jacob, and I'm addicted to playing the drums.
There's lots of stuff that makes it cool to be Native. Doing meth isn't one of them. Find something better to do. Check out ncai.org. A message from the Partnership for a Drug-Free America and the National Congress of American Indians.
Hear that? That's the sound of Hope being killed by meth. Methamphetamine use is causing huge problems in our community. Hear that? That's the sound of something you can do about it. Events like rodeo, res ball, and family time can help keep kids away from meth.
Talk to your kids. Keep our culture alive. A message from the Partnership for a Drug-Free America and the National Congress of American Indians.
Learn more at ncai.org.
Who am I? Am I Native? I don't want people assuming things because I'm Indian. I just want to be me. But how do I live in two worlds? Some guys just check out by doing meth. But that ain't for me. Because I see my family, my friends, my drum making, my future. There are a lot of cool things about being who I am. And meth isn't one of them.
Learn more at ncai.org. A message from the Partnership for a Drug-Free America and the National Congress of American Indians. Who am I? Am I Indian? Just 'cause I'm a girl from the res, don't make things up about me. What if I move away? Then who am I? Some kids try meth just to escape. But then I think about my grandma, my little brother, my beadwork, my poetry, and I think, I like who I am. And I know meth is not for me.
Check out ncai.org, a message from the Partnership for a Drug-Free America and the National Congress of American Indians.
Who am I? Am I Indian? Just 'cause I'm a girl from the res, don't make things up about me. What if I move away? Then who am I? Some kids try meth just to escape. But then I think about my grandma, my little brother, my beadwork, my poetry, and I think, I like who I am, and I know meth is not for me.
Check out ncai.org, a message from the Partnership for a Drug-Free America and the National Congress of American Indians.
Okay, wonderful live radio here, doing a little bit more juggling here this morning than I had thought. So we're going to hang in here and try one more thing and see if we can't take care of business. So please stay with us and appreciate your patience.
Who am I? Am I Indian? Just 'cause I'm a girl from the res, don't make things up about me. What if I move away? Then who am I? Some kids try meth just to escape, but then I think about my grandma, my little brother, my beadwork, my poetry, and I think, I like who I am, and I know meth is not for me.
Just a guess.
Check out ncai.org, a message from the Partnership for a Drug-Free America and the National Congress of American Indians.
No. Okay, that isn't working the way it's supposed to. We're going to go to Plan B here. Now, with many of our... Hang on a second, perhaps that's her. Mvskoke Radio. Oh, hi. Great. Hang on here. Okay, Ms. Bird, are you with us?
I am.
Oh, wonderful. We've been doing a little fumbling here as the wrong phone number got onto my note. Anyway, we have seen this wonderful story appearing in the in major press and the local stuff, and of course across the Indian country, about the latest development between the Choctaw Nation and the people of the Irish Republic, I believe. Is that correct? Regarding kind of a return here, let us do you a favor for the tribe while we're in a health and economic crisis, and they've been sending some aid of some sort. But this relationship between the Choctaw people and the Irish people goes back much further there. Back when the Choctaw people came to the aid and support of Ireland. Is that correct?
It is. It is a bond that has gone back many, many years.
Why don't you tell me about that first incident there?
Okay, well, in order to really relay this story, we have to go back in history sometime. So for Choctaw people, in our homeland and western portion of Alabama, Louisiana, and of course Mississippi, we began our land cessions in the late 1700s. Our last land cession with the signing of the Dancing Rabbit Creek was in 1830. And at that time, over 16,000 square miles were ceded. And so this started the first wave of what we term the Trail of Tears in 1831 to 1833. And our Trail of Tears removal period lasted from 1831 to 1903. We had a second wave in the 1840s, but it lasted all the way up until 1903. And so, Choctaw people experienced extreme hardship, loss, disease, hunger, a disconnect from our homeland. And it was, our courage, our loss, our sacrifice. We found ourselves in Indian territory, establishing farms, rebuilding, new leadership, reconnecting with family. And when we heard of this potato blight in Ireland and the devastation that it was doing to the country, our hearts went out to those families, experiencing hunger, loss of generations, the elderly, their children. This loss really resonated with us. We knew that sadness all too well, and it was this compassionate spirit of ours, of our ancestors, that recognized this heartache and wanted to help.
We have seen some references to what was called a potato famine over there. And this particular food source was incredibly important to those folks, and primarily as a foodstuff, but also some basis for economy. So during that blight, when the crops failed, the folks there were pretty much left without much to eat. Is that right?
It is. And this particular fungus that was responsible for the blight was highly contagious. So anytime that they tried to eradicate it in the fields, it would quickly spread. It was something that was in the leaves, the roots. It was in the soil, so it was very hard to contain. And so it pretty much decimated anything that tried to grow.
So they were left without something to put on the table, right?
That's right.
Now, as the tribe responded to this help, do you have some idea of how much support the Choctaw folks were able to send over there?
Yeah, so it would have been $170. There's different reports that we have that we're still researching that there might have been more, but at the time we do know that at least $170 has been recorded. That's about $5,000 today's currency.
And during that period, that's a pretty big chunk of change, right?
It is, and a lot of communities would have pulled together their money and resources and reached deep into their pockets to help out.
And the story pretty much, I guess, began there, but it was another step in fairly recent times that kind of brought more attention to it when the folks in Ireland decided to commemorate that generosity and compassion from the Choctaw folks with what has become a very stunning monument.
Yes. Alex Pentek is the sculptor. He created a beautiful, majestic piece called Kindred Spirits. It's composed of 9 eagle feathers. They stretch 20 feet high in the air. It's located in Middleton, County Cork, near the southern coast. And what he was trying to represent was an empty bowl, and the feathers represent our help in their time of need. Yeah,
the imagery is just amazing to see these beautiful feathers in such gigantic size kind of soaring into the air. What's been the reaction of the folks there in the Choctaw Nation? I mean, have you heard any feedback, I guess, from the grassroots folks by any chance?
We are just as excited to learn, especially with my work family and my personal family. I'm sure that the sentiment is shared across our nation. Our brothers and sisters reaching out. It's been a joy to see.
I can imagine, and it was a rather expensive commitment, I would assume, so they were willing to put their, I guess the old phrase goes, money where their mouth was, and fund this kind of monument. Now, have any of your tribal officials been over to visit this particular wonderful site?
Yes. They were there to commemorate and celebrate the unveiling a few years ago.
And what was their reaction? What did they bring back?
Oh, it was just pure joy. And our bond with the Irish people continues today. We regularly do participate in activities with Irish fairs. We have cultural dances and exchanges. We just hosted an Irish band called Runa, and they wanted to come and join our community, and we welcomed them as families so they could learn about our community and meet some folks in order to write a commemorative album about this gift and this bond that we share.
One other bond that you share, I think, is that of clans and tribalism. We've seen in the Celtic history, and of course the Irish and the Scots, and I would presume there are others there that wear clan tartans and adhere quite strongly to their connections to the family and the land there. Now, that would seem to have a lot of similarities and parallels with Native American people. And did you see this kind of parallel between the Choctaw and the Irish?
That's something I can't personally speak on. I'm not familiar with Irish history. I imagine, more research might uncover some of that symbolism and relate. For now, I just know that personally, in working with the band Runa and some other folks, that it's really just about our hearts. We really share that kindred spirit.
It's just so wonderful to hear. Now, in recent weeks, we've seen coverage from particularly the Native American press and some from major media of the Irish returning the favor there, sending support back to help the Choctaw people during this time of a viral crisis and, of course, the economic punch that we've pretty much all felt. So what kind of form is that taking, that sort of support?
Well, as far as I know, the GoFundMe page that has been put out from our brothers and sisters, out in the Southwest, and their time of need has been met by generous donations from Irish people coming together to support them. At this time, the Choctaw Nation, we are supporting our tribal members, and so we are definitely applauding those efforts to help where help is needed.
And what form has this support taken?
For who? I'm sorry.
Well, when the Irish send their support to the Choctaws now, is it financial support, or are they actually sending foodstuffs and supplies or any other needed goods?
As far as I know, the Irish have not sent anything that I'm aware of to help with our nation. I think that some of those funds have been concentrated, again, to the tribes in the Southwest that are harder hit.
Oh, that's wonderful that it's gone that far. Have there been any diplomatic relationships between the tribe and perhaps the government of Ireland?
As far as I know, I think that there's an open communication there. Again, that's not something I can speak on. That's not my level of expertise, but we do have officials in our government relationship office that could speak on that diplomatic relationship. But as I said, that bond goes back for many, many years.
Maybe I'll have to give him a call and kind of put him on the spot.
Yeah.
That way you're off the hook.
Okay.
Now, we have often looked to the Choctaws and the Chickasaws and Cherokees and Seminoles in a solidarity kind of union. And, of course, there are many issues here in the state of Oklahoma that are calling on tribes to take a stance in dealing with the state and federal government. Now, has the Choctaw Nation kind of stood up and are being counted? I know that's not exactly your expertise, but from what you've seen and the people you've spoken with, are they kind of standing in ranks, so to speak?
As far as I know, it's something that would definitely have to be answered more directly with our government relations department that deal with that on a regular basis. What I can attest to is the leadership that I have seen personally with this crisis. And so, we've had major disruptions to our operations, but, we continue to offer services to our tribal members, and we've worked with state and local officials, and we actually have a phased recovery plan in place. And I really enjoyed seeing Chief Batten come on Facebook, and give his question and answers to our tribal community in this time of need. And so some of those questions are answered there. Some of, its direction about the COVID crisis we're facing. And so, for now, while I can't answer those big questions because I'm not, like I said, that's not my expertise, I definitely put my faith in our leadership and the direction that we're getting.
Well, why don't we take a second there and kind of give us an idea of who you are and your position there with the tribe?
Yeah, so my name is Deanna Bird. I am the NAGPRA liaison. I am an archaeologist, and I work in the Historic Preservation Department. I am on a project where we are searching the United States systematically, institution by institution, in order to find our ancestors in collections across the United States. We work and consult respectfully with the individuals that are caring for our ancestors so that we can work to repatriate and rebury them. I work very closely with my spiritual partner, Misty Madbull, and we go and visit and do consultations on a regular basis, both in our homeland and across the country.
And how is that project going? How's it successful? Are you finding what you're looking for? Is it?
Yes. So we've completed about 11 states out of the United States so far. And so we're continuing to branch out and look for our ancestors. And, our kind of motto is no stone unturned. So we're checking little historic societies up to big universities to make sure that we know where our ancestors are at.
Well, you're going to have to be careful. Sometimes when you turn a stone over, you find something you weren't looking for.
Yeah.
Now, you said 11 states. Now, is this kind of a, what's that word, diaspora? The Choctaws had to spread out in order to survive economically and financially and in more of a contemporary climate? Or is this something that goes much deeper? You're finding that there were Choctaw people, back in more ancient times, shall we say, and in some very interesting positions and occupations. What are you finding like that?
Well, I would say it's deeper, but not in the way you suggested. So, in our homeland, as I mentioned before, in western Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, over a period of time, we had a lot of collectors and archaeologists that would go and loot sacred burial sites. And so that's how we're finding our ancestors spread across the country. And so we found ancestors all the way in Iowa, all the way on the East Coast. And so we're working with those institutions to bring them home.
Now, sometimes you get into a subject like that, and it gets a little touchy when we're dealing with bringing ancestors home. That sounds like Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, NAGPRA. Is that coming into play there?
Yes, it is.
And how are you using it? And do you have any numbers?
Well, we have increased our repatriations over the last couple of years, and we hope to find all of them. That's our goal. Misty and I are both mothers to beautiful children, and we've been taught that this is a multi-generational work. And so if there is something that we can lay the groundwork for our children to not have to do so much in their lifetime, then that's worth it to us. So in terms of numbers, I really couldn't count. I just know that they're increasing, which is a good sign.
Yes. I mean, anytime we get that sort of positive advancement. And please forgive me for bouncing all over the world here and asking all these weird questions. I guess that's my curiosity there, because I Tulsa boy and never got down south much, and was not familiar with the tribes that lived there. Now, as the tribe is progressing, and I presume some economic progress is there that will show in programs that are important. So, I guess if you were to sum it up, how is the tribe doing in relations to reaching its reaching its goals?
Again, that's something that I think that government relations, they have a really good handle on those statistics and some of those numbers that I think you're probably looking for. For now, I can, let people know that we are in phase 1 of our phased recovery plan that we have in place. And if anybody wants to see further details about what that looks like, they can visit ChoctawNation.com to see all of those. And then, of course, reach out to our government relations department to get more details about, what our goals are and how they're being met, and, what this crisis is doing to change some of those, if so.
I know it's changing all of us. Now, perhaps a question more in line with what you do then. Has there been any feedback about your projects and the repatriation of ancestors and family like that? Have you had much chance to talk with elders or others about what you're doing there?
Yes. So for the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, we have an internal review committee that is comprised of elders and spiritual leaders and respected individuals in our community. And we regularly go to them and check in with them, especially about issues that we're not really sure which direction to move forward. Sometimes without a cultural affiliation, we might go to them and ask what their advisement is. And so we regularly check in just to make sure that we're getting the proper direction for cases and moving forward with our work.
That raises a couple of questions in my mind. And first of all, I guess, have you run into many situations that were perhaps culturally or spiritually touchy that you had to change your direction or your plans or your work on them?
I think that a lot of the cases are individual. We definitely come to them for guidance with those. I think the consensus is that we definitely want to do whatever we can to make sure our ancestors find that peace, and so that's what we're going to do. And so some of those decisions are really trying to focus in on how we can better work with that institution to accomplish that goal. And so I think that's a lot of times what we end up deciding is how the best route is for our ancestors so that they're respected while they're in care, that we can facilitate the paperwork to get going as quickly as possible and follow all the steps in the law that we need to get them safely returned.
Have you run into situations where you had to back off that were so sensitive that you couldn't progress, or people, I guess, gave you a warning against dealing with this particular item, or perhaps an ancestor who has been buried or something there that you perhaps couldn't explain?
No. All of the cases that we have have been very open and respectful. We've never run into any cases where we had an issue. We've always just been advised to work within the law and to work closely with the individuals in the institutions. So that hasn't been a case for our work. I can say that one thing I'd like to report on is that from my perspective in reaching out to so many different states and so many different individuals, that I think the tides are changing. There's a lot of wonderful people that have come into curation positions that are collection managers, archaeologists that are willing to work with us and really develop real wonderful working relationships to have the same goal.
Do you think your work here has had any effect on with the non-native professionals that you've worked with? The reason I ask is years ago I was working on a project that took me into the archives of the Smithsonian Institution. The story I was working on was repatriation, and one of the questions I was asking is, what do you guys have in your collections here? And they took me into one of their storerooms, and these big, huge, towering stacks of drawers were all full of the bones of our ancestors. Being a native person, it made me feel a bit creepy, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up for a couple of reasons. But what struck me was they were still looking at these things as specimens and part of their collection rather than human beings. For me, I have to say that with personal reaction. But have you had the chance to kind of change the thinking with some of the people that you've worked with?
I like to think so, and I like to think that, as I mentioned before, the tides are changing, and I'm really starting to see that with the youth that are coming up, that are young professionals that are wanting to learn. I recently just had an experience in our homeland in Mississippi, and I was working with some students, and after my presentation, several of them came up, and these are, probably freshmen to sophomore, even some graduate students in university, and they just kept asking, what can I do? What can I do? And they want to learn. They want to change the dynamics of these relationships, these conversations, and their heart and their passion is into this. And so I have seen this change. It's already happening, and so I'm definitely willing to meet them more than halfway to whatever it is, if I can give. Every tribe has their own experience, has their own guidelines, has their own standards, and I encourage them to reach out to who they need to, and if they want to call me up and practice on me, that's okay. And so I'm definitely seeing a really wonderful change.
In the course of your work, have you been able to identify or perhaps fill in some of the gaps in perhaps either history or culture of your people that that were kind of glaring? I can't even think of the word. Places that fill in the gaps, fill in the holes, things that you didn't know that now you know. Have you been able to do some of that?
I think with any individual story, they came to collections by way of a point in time in history, and so we certainly celebrate that ancestor story of how they came into collections. I'm not sure it adds to our narrative. I think it's just a way for us to respect that individual and what timeline that they lived in and what period, who their family might have been, what their relations would have been like. And I also feel like it's really important to work with our tribal partners in the Southeast. And we definitely want to collaborate as much as we can because we realize that we shared ancestry back in our homeland with multiple tribes. And so we bring them in and we ask, what their storyline is and collaborate for each individual case.
Okay, well, that's so wonderful to hear about the interest of the young people who want to go back and, reclaim some of this history and culture. I could imagine we're seeing that here among our Creek people too. The young people fill our immersion camps and are looking to use language, sing songs, participate in kinds of things. Now, as the Choctaw Nation is facing its future, and I'm going to presume your work is going to continue, I think, what direction do you think you will be heading, and do you have any feel for what you'd like to achieve there?
For me personally, before I retire, I'd like to know where our ancestors are. I think that's definitely something Misty and I share as a passion, to at least know where our ancestors are. I'll tell you a funny story. When I first started in this position a couple years ago, I was really enthusiastic. I was gung-ho, and I was like, we can find them all in a year. And, it quickly became evident that it's a much, much bigger project. And so, I think that that's something that I look forward to is, maybe they won't all be repatriated and respectfully reburied so they can continue their journey on the other side in my lifetime. But I hope to at least put a dent in finding where they're at so that we can know and go and pray with them and let them know that we are thinking of them, that we haven't forgotten them, and that we're working as hard as we can and to have those conversations for their return. Have you achieved a piece of that goal yet? I do believe that we have. 11 states it doesn't seem like much, but when you kind of make phone calls and send emails and letters and you really work collaboratively with these institutions and knock on doors, 11 states is good progress, I think. Yeah, I'd say it was. Right here in around Okmulgee, we're talking about 11 counties of the Creek Nation and the huge job that our people are doing. So 11 states has got to be something that is just almost overwhelming there. Now, if I'm sure there are some folks who are Choctaw who are listening in. Let's hope so. And the opportunity to maybe gain some more knowledge or a connection always pops up afterwards. So if someone was interested in getting in touch with you and finding out more about your program, dear, how would they do that? Yeah, so please send me an email. It's dbyrd, B-Y-R-D, at ChoctawNation.com, and I would love to hear from you and answer any questions or give you any more information. Okay, and your title again? Is NAGPRA Liaison, and again, it's Deanna Byrd with a Y.
Ms. Bird, I want to thank you so much for taking time to chat with me. You raised some questions I'll probably have to aim at the administration and concentrate more on what is a fascinating historical project. Well, again, I want to say, Mado, we appreciate your time, and we'll get out of your way here.
Mayoko Ki, it's been my honor.
Okay, wonderful. That was Deanna Barr from the Choctaw Nation working on the project. We got to get out of here, so we're going to say catch us next week as we continue to struggle under the challenges we're dealing with. So, Mado, go ahead, Scott. You've been listening to Mvskoke Radio. Join us again next week for more local, tribal, and community news and updates. Mado.